Hey, TikTok. Does scripture give us the idea that Jesus can change? I think so. Angela Parker, aka Boozy Bible Scholar in the house, coming to you with this question as I interpret Matthew 15:21 through 28. So we'll be looking at Matthew 15:21 through 28, and this is a series that I call Scripture Through Womanist Eyes. I gave a lecture a few weeks ago in Seattle regarding this subject and I have received great feedback. So if you're interested in the article that's coming out shortly, please feel free to message me and I can perhaps send it to you. Does Jesus change? Through Womanist Eyes. And this is my final eye look. So keep watching. Okay, TikTok, brows are done. My brows are done, and I'm going in with my base for my eyeshadow. And the base I'm using today is P. Louise eye primer. It's an oldie but a goodie. I don't even know if you can still get this anymore, but P. Louise eye primer. And I probably have a little bit too much, but that's all right. And as we think about if Jesus changes in the Gospel of Matthew, I would start with a base of knowing a little bit about the Gospel of Matthew. So when I tell students that you have to think about every part of the book in interpretation, even if you're reading, for example, Matthew chapter 15, you still need to know what's going on in every other part of the gospel before you can even really interpret Matthew 15. So remember, Matthew 15 is where I would argue that Jesus has a change of mind or a change of heart or a change of ministerial focus. And so for a base, you need to understand that Matthew chapter 1 opens up with what scholars call the genealogy of Jesus, the Biblios Genesis, the book of the beginning of Jesus. And in that book of the beginning of Jesus, there is a genealogy that lists 5 women in Jesus's genealogy. Those women include Tamar of Genesis 38, Ruth of the book of Ruth, Rahab from the Joshua narrative, wife of Uriah, who is subsequently married to David, and then finally Mary, the mother of Jesus. All sexually suspect women and all foreign women, except Bathsheba. We're not exactly sure about her, but all the other women are foreign women. The genealogy does not list the matriarchs of Matthew or the matriarchs of Israel. So as we begin to contour out how Jesus changes in the Gospel of Matthew, we have to begin to, like I say, contour our eyes. And I'm going in with the lightest shade in Mothership 10 Moonlit Seduction, which is still a deep shade, which is why I love it for my skin tone. Mothership does really well with deep skin tones, with colors deep enough for deeper skin tones. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, when the Canaanite woman approaches Jesus in Matthew chapter 15, it is also the same story that occurs in Mark chapter 7. And so the way we begin to contour the differences in the narratives between Mark and Matthew is called redaction criticism. And so what we notice in Matthew's gospel is that the woman is referred to by the gospel writer as a Canaanite woman. In the Gospel of Mark, she is referred to as a Syrophoenician woman. So then the question becomes, why did the gospel writer of Matthew give her this particular delineation as opposed to the gospel writer of Mark? Well, I would argue that if the gospel writer of Matthew is writing for a predominantly Jewish audience, then he is bringing back all of the cultural memory for the Jewish folks about their rivalry, their dislike, their hatred of Canaanite people. And so because they have this hatred of Canaanite people, when they see Jesus ignore her in the Gospel of Matthew at Matthew 15:21 through 28, and does not answer her a word according to the text, that would seem relatable to the Jewish people who are listening to the narrative. So you begin to carve out the story by asking, why did the gospel writer name her as Canaanite instead of Syrophoenician? But then to put the deeper meaning into the text as we read it, to understand the deeper meaning of the text, and then you'll see that I'm deepening my outer corner. Jesus says it is not right to give food to the dogs under the table. And the Canaanite woman says, yes, Lord. So really, she's acknowledging that she is the dog underneath the table that is begging for the crumbs or eating the crumbs that fall from the children's food. And that's an interesting tidbit that I hadn't thought about before until I was reading scholars like Moussa Dubé. And Moussa Dubé talks about the internalized racism that this Canaanite woman was experiencing and highlighting in her response to Jesus, that she was acknowledging she was a dog under a table. And so when I read that, I have to ask, in what ways do we as oppressed people or marginalized people in the United States of America or above, how do we internalize some of the racism that occurs towards us? Do we internalize it and accept it as normal? But as always, I think the magic and the glitter comes in when we realize that Jesus, after looking into the eyes of this Canaanite woman, after realizing that he's looking into the eyes of the other who is actually a part of him. So when I say that the Canaanite woman is actually a part of Jesus, the genealogy, remember that's why we started, lists women in Jesus's genealogy who would be representative of this Canaanite woman. And so when those quote unquote others are in your genealogy, you realize that they are a part of you as well. And so Jesus's ministry expands after this conversation with the Canaanite woman. His ministry expands from focusing on Israel or Israelites to actually focusing on more diverse groups of people, according to Matthew chapter 15, after the conversation with the Canaanite woman, where Jesus feeds 4,000, and the feeding of those 4,000 are actually a group of mixed people, more ethnicities than before when he fed 5,000 in chapter 14. That feeding was only Jewish people. And so we know that because of where Jesus is doing the feeding. So when you read Bible, you always have to look at a map. And why is all of this important? Because we have to clean up. We have to clean up under our eye, but we also have to clean up how we understand Jesus. And if Jesus has an opportunity to change his focus, change his ministry, and see the other in his ministry, then I would argue white Christian nationalism can also change if they're really trying to follow Jesus and the example of Jesus. So there's still a lot of cleanup to do as we understand this passage and what it means for ethnicity conversations and how we can actually be better Jesus followers. And if you are interested in reading my forthcoming work on A Word About White Christian Nationalism, A Womanist Response According to the Gospel of Matthew, shoot me a message and I can send you this paper that is soon to be published. So here is my final look, TikTok. I am finishing off with Mancera's Roses the Knee. And I know that scripture conversations are hard, but I would implore you to be bold, be brilliant, and continue to be brave as you have these conversations. Angela Parker, aka Boozy Bible Scholar, please feel free to like, to comment, to share, to tag me if you share it. Thank you and have a great day.